thing. Deuteronomy, I believe we made it to chapter 19, right? So today, what I want to do is just wrap it up. I will finish today. I know I often say that, but definitely we'll finish Deuteronomy today. Just going to get to my notes. The book of Deuteronomy is one of the most, not the most, but one of the most quoted books in the New Testament, or from the Old Testament in the New Testament, other than, I think it's Psalm and Isaiah. Just trying to find out where my notes are. There you go. Some unknown reason it didn't save. That's not good. Right, here you go. It's also one of the most influential books in how the apostles write about the law. It's foundational in the understanding of the application of the law in the life of the early church. The Pentateuch was translated, I should say the Old Testament was translated into Greek, and so a lot of the passages that seems disconnected in the Old Testament, because ours is translated from the Hebrew text, and the translations quoted in the New Testament are actually from the Greek text, not necessarily the Hebrew text. And so even though it doesn't always sound the same, sometimes the quotation is present. And for instance, in James, he quotes Deuteronomy a lot, he quotes Leviticus a lot, but because of how things are said in the LXX, it doesn't always come across as a quotation in the New Testament. And the same you find with the book of Deuteronomy. It is one of the few Old Testament books that mentions the tribulation period. What I want to talk about this morning as we wrap up the book of Deuteronomy is answer the question, does God have a future plan for the nation of Israel? Now, does that mean Israel as the church, or does that mean Israel as Jesus, or does that mean Israel as in Israel, God's chosen people? Look at Deuteronomy chapter 4. I believe it's verse 29. Speaking about Israel being expelled from the land because of their disobedience, he says, 29, but from there you will seek Yahweh your God, and you will find him if you search after him with all your heart and with all your soul. That is hugely significant. Later in Deuteronomy chapter 18, I think it's 16, and in 19, he says, you cannot obey Yahweh your God. And I'll show you now in chapter 19 where he says, for God has not given you a new heart or a circumcised heart. Look at verse 30. When you are in tribulation, or when the tribulation comes and all these things come upon you in the latter days, so clearly he's not talking about tribulation that they are going through and will go through immediate, but future, you will return to Yahweh your God and obey his voice. So what is he talking about? The seeking after God here. It's Israel's restoration, Israel's new heart and new capacity to desire God. So they're going to be in a tribulation, and as they are in this period of hardship and affliction, what will happen to Israel? They will turn to God, because it's during that period that Israel will return to God. This is new covenant language. You will return and obey his voice. For Yahweh your God is a merciful God, and he will not leave you or destroy you or forget the covenant with your fathers that he swore to them. And I pointed out right from the get-go that the land, the promise, the covenant is repeated over and over in this book for a very specific reason. God wants them to remember that he's made a covenant with them. And as they enter the land, he wants them to remember that he will not forgo his covenant. He will never rescind on his covenant. What are part of the elements of the covenant is you will have a seed, you will have a land, you will have a people. The seed here relates to Christ, the land relates to Israel, the boundaries of Israel, and the people are the Jews. You will have those things. And it has never been spiritual, and it should not be interpreted as in a spiritual sense. We've looked at the preamble or the introduction to this remembrance or this second law or revision of the law, remembrance of the law. We looked at the historical prologue in chapters 1, verse 5 through to chapter 4. Then we looked at the general stipulations. This is for wholehearted allegiance to God as these covenant obligations are made known to them in relation to the law. And then we looked at specific stipulations. Those are the individual laws as it relates to the general life of Israel, and that is chapter 12 through to verse 26. So we are looking at did I say specific? I mean general stipulations of the nation or to the nation of Israel. The last two sections, and I think it's on the last slide, it deals with the divine witnesses that God will call against Israel, and then the blessings and curses, which leads up to Moses' exit from the scene. And that's we'll cover in survey format this morning. So in the last two sections, in chapter 19 through to 21, we have the preservation of life. The preservation of life is seen in the civil laws that God establishes, and these civil laws are an expression of the allegiance to God. The cities of refuge are there to protect life, to save life, and not, for instance, if there's a case in which a person accidentally kills another, he can flee to a city of refuge, not the cities of refuge that we have in the US, but this is a different, proper city of refuge. These are to redeem life. They are there to protect life, and it relates to God's promise to Israel in preserving their lives. And there are different ways in this takes place. Look at chapter 20. It says in verse 10, when you draw near to a city to fight against it, offer terms of peace to it. And so you don't just go in and wipe them out. And initially, God says of those who are pagans and they sacrifice to pagan gods, you will burn, destroy the city, let nothing remain so that they don't influence your worship. And here, the laws of war includes that they go in and offer terms of peace. Look at verse 11. If the city, if it responds to you peaceably and opens to you, then all the people who are found in it shall do forced labor for you and shall serve you. You will not live amongst them in terms of relating to them as equals. They will be your servants. And but if it makes no peace with you, but makes war against you, you shall besiege it. It's the terms of war. If they say, no, we don't want your peace treaty, you wipe them out. Verse 13, and when Yahweh your God gives it, this is the land, into your hand, or the city into your hand, you shall put all its males to the sword, but the women and the little ones, the livestock, and everything else, all its spoils, you shall take as plunder for yourselves, and you shall enjoy the spoils of your enemies, which Yahweh your God has given you. So clearly there were rules of engagement. It was not that every city, every group of people had to be wiped out. God had certain standards for war, and the nation of Israel had to comply with that. God's standard for life becomes the standard of life for not only his people, but for all people. There should be, and I know this word is used incorrectly here, atonement in the ESV for unsolved murders. It is just a covering or a protection for unsolved murders. Verse 8, accept atonement, O Lord, O Yahweh, for your people, Israel, who you have redeemed, and do not set the guilt of the innocent blood in the midst of your people, so that their blood guilt be atoned for. And so, in the case of accidental murder or even murder that is not solved, there should be an offering for that. There's respect for life, even the life of those who have died. You show honor, you sacrifice. So that God wouldn't judge you for not being able to solve these murders. And so clearly there is significance to life. And so God expects them to respect life. In chapter 21, we have a very difficult section here, and I'm going to deal with it because it is an interpretive problem. We deal with the issue of marrying those who are not Jews. Notice what he says in chapter 21, verse 10. When you go out to war against your enemies, and Yahweh your God gives them into your hand, and you take them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire to take her to be your wife, and you bring her home. Notice there's a desire to be wed with her, to be wed her. You will bring her to your home, to your own house, and shall shave her head and pare her nails. What on earth? Shave her head. And she shall take off the clothes in which she was captured and shall remain in your house and lament her father and her mother because they most probably would have been killed a full month. And after that, you may go in to her and you shall be a husband and she shall be your wife. They didn't have the same rules and regulations for marriage as we had. If you wanted a wife, you could just take a wife and they become your wife. The parents sometimes made a decision and planned your marriage for you. In this case, if it's a captive, you will allow her to mourn the death of her parents, and if they have died, and then she shall become your wife. Now in verse 14 it says, but if you no longer delight in her, you shall let her go where she wants, but you shall not sell her for money, nor shall you treat her as a slave, since you have humiliated her. And the word here, humiliated, has the idea of defiled her. She's no longer pure. She's no longer available to be married. And so you will allow her to go wherever she wants to go. Often this verse is used as a divorce, but it does not. I mean, clearly it does not say that you will divorce her. It says you will let her go. What do you think is behind the idea of the shaving of the head, the clipping of the nails, and the removal of the clothing? I can tell you what some of the views are, and it's quite weird, but anyway, go ahead. Purification, okay, anyone else? Yeah, I like that. Come sit over the mic. Somebody take the mic too. I want that recorded. And say your name.
Renouncing her identity.
Okay, now that you have the mic, what do you mean by that? You don't know. You're right. I just want to know what you mean by it.
Well, she was a foreigner, and now she belongs to the people of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so wouldn't it be a shame for a woman to cut her hair then? Sorry. It is not to shame her. In the New Testament, in the city of Corinth, in the region of Corinth, it was a shame for those women because of the association with the temple prostitutes. Here, there's a shaving similar to what Rowan said, a cutting off of the past life, a separation and a cleansing of a past life. There's also she has to remove her clothes to show no allegiance to what she was, and she's now under new authority. And so, yes, there's definitely her coming underneath this new head, her husband, means that she belongs to him as a wife, and so her new identity is found in him and with him and not her past. And so this whole idea of shaving and the painting of the nails is you have no relation to your past life anymore, and you are now to be identified with this new man and this new identity as a person who's been brought into this new community. And so I don't want people to misread that. There is no shame at this stage in the history of Israel for the women to cut their hair. Any questions before I move on? No? Okay. Where are we in the notes? Jump over that. All right, let's go to chapter 22. In chapter 22 through to 25, we have human relationships that is being described in God's absolute human relationship, I should say sovereignty. I just trying to make sense of my notes in my Bible here. I write in the margins, and I don't always know what I write. The mixing of two conflicting things in chapter 22. Notice what he says. And again, there's controversy as to what is meant here in verse 5. A woman shall not wear a man's garment, nor shall a man put on a woman's cloak. For whoever does these things is an abomination to Yahweh your God. Okay, so what do you think that means? Can a woman wear pants? It says that a woman shall not wear a man's garment. I want that guy to answer. And say your name. Yeah. Push the button. There should be a light on.
Are we on now? Yes, a woman can wear pants. So what exactly was the question?
Okay. Okay, that was very succinct. Thank you. So, does that not mean that she's wearing men's clothing, though?
No, I think it's got a lot more to do with the cultural symbol of the man's role versus the woman's role,
Okay.
where the man is the leader and the woman's she submits under the man. Exactly the same as the previous topic you just covered. So, in today's culture, for argument's sake, a woman wearing a pants is it's not a cultural symbol of womanhood versus manhood. I think
Okay,
that is
so I wouldn't make a cultural argument because I think it's bigger than that. But let me hear what Rowan says, and then we'll have Robert speak. Right?
Unfortunately, I was going to go along the cultural thing as well because cultural it dictates what styles men and women would wear. Like in Scotland in the 1600s, wearing a kilt was a manly thing,
Yeah,
not a
and it's
womanly
wrong.
thing.
So no, that's not happening. No. So okay, beyond the culture, I don't think it's a cultural argument here. But let me hear what Robert says.
Well, I would argue you can't make it any other way. But to elaborate on that, the question that immediately comes up when you made the statement: can a woman wear a man's clothes? What is a man's clothes? Because that's the definition. You can say, okay, in Israel it meant
this at that time, because that makes sense. But that doesn't necessarily apply to us today, because the things that they wore.
Yeah.
So it's more, you have to generalize it more
Yeah.
in the sense of, and that's where I think the cultural comes in, because wearing pants, although there is that joke, the woman wearing the pants in the house.
That's why I laughed when you said
Yes,
a woman
yes,
can wear pants.
because but that joke comes from the implication that wearing the pants is a male thing and it refers to authority. But fundamentally, that's what it's about. It's about, are you doing something, and in this case, wearing a particular kind of clothes that usurps the man's authority.
Okay.
And
so
that's where it
that is
comes
still
from.
along the lines of a cultural argument. What did they wear in those days? They both wore tunics, and the men's tunic was slightly shorter than a woman's tunic, slightly longer, and then it developed over time where the arm length varied as well. But both wore tunics, was robe kind of robe style. There was no identification other than sometimes the women having an undergarment, whereas the men did not sometimes wear undergarment unless you were a priest and you were forced to wear an undergarment. For various reasons. When he would go up the stairs, he had to wear an undergarment for various reasons. So what is actually in view is not a cultural argument. It's the mixing of two things that should not be mixed. And one of you was starting to make that argument. It has to do with headship or robe rather than just clothing. There's a deeper argument in view. Now, if you read down in verse 9, it says, you will not sow in your vineyard two kinds of seed, lest the whole yield be forfeited. Why can't you sow two kinds of seed? Why can't you sow a mustard seed and a strawberry seed? Have you ever tried to plant in a one pot plant two seeds that are not exactly the same? I've tried, doesn't work. One kills the other. If you plant what's that fynbos that we have? Not fynbos, and the thing that Lauren gave us, that spekboom. The thing is a beast. It kills everything around it. So you plant that next to a fruit-bearing thing. The fruit-bearing thing needs the nutrients that this thing takes, the spekboom takes, and so it kills it. So the two things that are conflicting in nature, two mixing of things that are not the same should not take place. You can read the section. It deals with, look, for instance, verse 11, you shall not wear cloth of wool and linen mixed. Do we wear that? Yes, we do. Some of you have wool and linen on today. It's a sin, right? No. What God is saying is that you will not mix things that are not supposed to be mixed. And that's what happens here with the woman wearing the garment of a man. A man must not pretend to be a woman. So if he's wearing a woman's cloak, it's not just the fact that he's wearing it, he's pretending to be something that he's not. So there shouldn't be a mixture of things that are not supposed to be mixed. And that's the argument that God is making here. A woman shouldn't pretend to be a man. She shouldn't. So wearing the garment is not the argument. It's her wearing it as if she's a man. You understand the argument, right? So she's now not just taking on the garment, because the sin is not wearing the garment. The sin is the ideology behind wearing the garment. Is it that she's now thinking she's a guy, or he's thinking that he's a girl? That is a sin. That was God is saying. The two things that should not be, two conflicting things that should not be mixed, should not be mixed. And so the entire argument is not hinged on a cultural thing, but an essential, what's the word? Yeah, the synonym to that. Natural thing? If you think of a better word, let me know. Okay, let's move on. I'm going to jump over that. Let's move to chapter 24. Another interpretive problem dealing with the conversation of divorce. When a man takes a wife and marries her, then if she finds no favor, and I'll explain what that means, in his eyes, because he has found some indecency in her, and he writes a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house. and she departs out of his house, if she goes and becomes another man's wife, and the latter man hates her and writes her a certificate of divorce and puts it in her hand and sends her out of his house, and if the latter man dies who took her to be his wife, then the former husband who sends her away may not take her again to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that is an abomination before Yahweh. And you shall not bring sin upon the land and that Yahweh your God is giving to you for an inheritance. Interesting section. Okay, what is this talking about? First of all, the man takes a woman and then he finds defilement in her. Now, Deuteronomy does not take the time to explain that this is developed elsewhere in Exodus and in Leviticus. I think both of them are in chapter 13, if I remember correctly. Regardless, what that is if they test her for being pure, not having been with a man, and they found her not to be pure, having been with a man, then a certificate of divorce can be written. He's not received her as his wife yet. And so the argument for divorce here must take in consideration the Jewish context of divorce. Notice it says, if a man takes a wife, she's not married yet. The betrothal period, you are not formally, but legally you are the wife. So formally, the relationship has not been consummated, but legally you are bound to her in the betrothal period. And he finds no favor, so the testing takes place, and he sees that there's indecency in her. He's able to divorce her. That's what Joseph wants to do with Mary during the betrothal period. This was legal for Jews, and so the betrothal period was the period of divorce. And what happens after this is that there's defilement because she's now taken by other men, and he who wants her back can't take her back because God says this continual moving of one woman to another man is an abomination, and that will cause sin in the land, and God does not want that to take place. And so what God is not doing here is commending divorce. What God is doing here is saying that divorce can take place in the betrothal period, but it should not perpetuate remarriage of this woman. So yes, difficult section to deal with, and if you have personal questions on that, I am willing to deal with you on a personal level. Verse 7 deals with kidnapping and stealing a person. It is a sin if a man is found stealing one of his brothers of your people. Yeah, we use the word kidnapping. You're stealing a person. It's the same as taking an object or a cow or a donkey. It's the same language used. You will not steal something that does not belong to you. And stealing your brother is kidnapping. That's the language we use today. And if he treats him as a slave and sells him, then that thief, because he stole his brother, shall die. Why? Because it's a sin to steal. So kidnapping is a sin. In the Old Testament, if you were caught kidnapping, what would happen to you? You'd be stoned to death. You shall purge the evil from your midst. What is the evil? The stealing of another person. Now, if kidnapping takes place today, we don't kill people. So I don't want to hear that we decided to have mob justice and kill a person because he stole another person. You were reporting to the authorities, and whatever the authorities choose to do. If our law of the country has death for kidnapping, that's the law of the country. If it's imprisonment, then that's the law of the country. Verse 16 says, father shall not be put to death because of the children, and children shall not be put to death because of their fathers. Each one shall be put to death for his own sin. In other words, you're not accountable for the sins of your lineage or your descendants. Everybody is accountable for his own sin. That is huge in our culture today, because now people who have not committed the sin of discrimination during the apartheid are being judged for the sins of the forefathers just because they look like them. That is a sin. You cannot hold former sins against people that didn't commit that sin. Everybody who commits a sin must be held accountable for the sin that they commit. You cannot judge someone else for another's sin. Okay, I need to move on. Let me deal with the last two sections. Chapter 27 and 28 deals with blessings and cursing. Yes, God offers blessing for faithfulness and cursing for disobedience. Those who faithfully obey will receive God's blessing, and those who disobey will receive the curses. The curses go beyond the individual to the land. If you disobey God's command, the land will be affected. Now, there are a number of different things that relates to the future of Israel from this stage forward, right to the end of this book. Moses ends the legal discussion in chapter 26 with the following, verse 18. And Yahweh has declared today that you are a people for his treasured possession that he has promised you, and that you are to keep all his commandments, and that he will set you in praise, and that he will set you in praise and in fame and in honor high above all nations that he has made, that you shall be a people holy to Yahweh your God, as he promised. Moses ends the legal aspect of this recall of the law, the remembrance of the law, with a promise that God will exalt the nation of Israel. This is unfulfilled. And so now, moving forward, he deals with the impact of their disobedience. They will go into judgment. They will lose the land. They will have people ruling them for many years, and they will be expelled for many years. That is because they cannot obey Yahweh. Let me just see if I can find that verse. I think it's in chapter 19, is it 18? If you find a verse that says, for you are not able to obey the commands, just let me know. I know I wrote it down. Nope. Okay, so yeah, I'm not going to find it now. But chapter 27 and 28 shows the weight of the law in that God expects him to keep it. Can they keep it? No. And that's the problem. Nobody can perfectly keep the law. And there's a line that says, for Yahweh has not given you a circumcised heart or a heart to obey him. God expects faithful obedience to his command, and they cannot do it. But notice the promise that he gives in verse 13 of 28. And Yahweh God will make you the head and not the tail, and you shall only go up and not down if you obey the commandments of Yahweh, your God, which I command you today, and be careful to do them. In other words, God will do this. This is unfulfilled. They are not the head of the nations. They are fighting to be the head, but they are not the head of the nations. And so God still has a promise to fulfill to the nation of Israel. Notice what he says in verse 45. All these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of Yahweh your God to keep his commandments and his statutes that he commanded you, that they shall be a sign and a wonder against you and your offspring. What does it mean there? You cannot fully obey the commands of God. Why does he give it? If they can't do it, then why does he give it? To show their sinfulness, to show their greater need. What do they need? They need a heart that is changed by him, so that they, through his grace, are able to fulfill his law. There are so many things in here that indicates that it's not being fulfilled. Look at verse 49. And Yahweh will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping like the eagle, and it's not America, a nation whose language you do not understand, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old and show mercy to the young. And some say that that has taken place. But look at verse 52. They shall besiege you in all your towns until your high and fortified walls in which you are trusted come down throughout all your land. Israel has not yet been laid to waste. That day is coming. Verse 53 is a shocking reminder of what will happen to them. And you shall eat the fruit of your womb, the flesh of your sons and daughters. Why? Because there'll be nothing else to eat. Look at verse 55 in the middle. Children of you whom he is eating. There's just a shocking reality that will take place. This has not happened yet. Israel has not been in a tribulation this great that they are forced to eat their own children. That day is still coming. That is because God will ultimately judge them for the rejection of the nation, of the Messiah. Oh, there it is. Chapter 29. This is why God will judge them. Verse 4. But to this day, Yahweh has not given you a heart to understand or eyes to see or ears to hear. What did Jesus say? He that has ears to hear, let him hear. God says he has not given them a heart to understand. Why? That's the problem. The law is given to a people that cannot obey it. The law is given to a people that do not have a circumcised heart. The law is given to a people that the absolutes in the law, it is you will never have any other God before me. You will never steal, or you must never steal. It's not that you shall not. It's absolute statements that God requires faithful obedience all the time. Can anybody do that? No, that's the point. I've not given you eyes to see and ears to hear. And Isaiah picks this up as well. God closes their eyes, and so they cannot fully obey the commandments that God expects of them. And so they will go in judgment. Why? Why does God do this? So that his grace upon them would be magnified in their restoration and their repentance. That is what chapter 30 is about. Notice what he says in verse 4. If your outcasts, actually I have to read a little bit more here. Let me go up to, I'll just read from verse 1. And when all these things come upon you, and these are the curses, they are in tribulation, they utterly almost wiped out. All these things come upon you, the blessing and the curse, which I have set before you, and you call them to mind, and you remember, among all the nations where Yahweh your God has driven you, they are no longer in the land, they are dispersed abroad, and return to Yahweh your God, you and your children, and obey his voice in all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your soul. Then Yahweh your God will restore your fortunes and have mercy on you. Then God will have mercy on you. Notice what he says next. And he will gather you again from all the peoples where Yahweh your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are in the outermost parts of heaven, from there Yahweh your God will gather you, and from there he will take you. And Yahweh your God will bring you into the land that your fathers possessed, that you may possess it. Hang on. At this stage, have they possessed it yet? No. They're not in the land yet. And this is written as if it has taken place. And he will make you more prosperous. So this is future. This is God bringing the nation back to the land and giving them the full extent of the land. And notice what he says in the latter part of verse 5. And he will make you more prosperous than and numerous than your fathers. And Yahweh your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your offspring, so that you will love Yahweh your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and so that you may live. What is that? Verse 6. What is that? That is new covenant language. God will circumcise the heart. God will give you the ability to obey. You can go Ezekiel 36, Jeremiah 31. Forget the other passage now. What's the other passage? 36. Ezekiel 33, 36, Jeremiah 31, and I believe it's also 33. I forget the other passage, but it doesn't matter. This is new covenant language. What does a new covenant to Israel include? Restoration of God's people, restoration of the land, and a blessing on Israel such as has never been seen before. That's part of the new covenant. So then who's the new covenant made with? Israel. Yes, the remnant. Israel. God promises to restore Israel even though they will fall. He sets a law that cannot be kept, and then he gives them a heart that is able to keep the law. Right up till that stage, no Jew will be able to fulfill the law of God. And then when, now some covenantalists will say, well, this is fulfilled in Jesus Christ. In part it is, but there's still unfulfilled aspects in this promise. The book of Deuteronomy ends with God's future promise of restoration to the nation of Israel. Look at chapter 31, verse 6. And I'm going to ask you, what is the significance of this verse? Be strong and courageous, and do not fear or be in dread of them, for it is Yahweh your God who goes with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Look at verse 8. It is Yahweh your God who goes before you. He will be with you, and he will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. I have to check the Hebrew here, but I think this is a low and an imperfect in both cases, which means do not ever fear, for he will never leave you nor forsake you. Why is this significant? Two reasons: immediate context and future prophecy. Why is this significant? Anybody have any ideas? There's a favorite verse in Joshua 1, and verse 5. And it's one of those life verses. No man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. Just as I was with Moses, so I will be with you, and I will not leave you nor forsake you. Be strong and courageous, for you shall cause the people to inherit the land that I swore to your fathers to give to them. Only be strong and very courageous, being careful to do according to all the law that Moses, my servant, commanded you. Interesting. Who's speaking here? Is Yahweh speaking to Joshua, son of Nun? He didn't have a mother, so called him. Just joking. Son of Nun. God speaks to Joshua, and repeats the language that he spoke to Moses. And in some cases, some think that this is Joshua writing the end of Deuteronomy in repeating the words here, and it's not the case. It's the same God speaking to two different people, just repeating the same thing. So immediate context, God is setting the stage for a continuation of leadership. There's going to be a transition of leadership from Moses to Joshua, and the language that God uses for the nation of Israel as he speaks with Moses is the same language that he speaks to Joshua in confirming that he will be with them. What is the future implication and fulfillment of this promise?
The return of the Jews to Israel.
And no, in what way? There's, I will not leave you nor forsake you, speaks about what? God's presence with his people, right? I will not abandon you is the idea. Okay, so then do we have something like that in the New Testament? We do. In Matthew 28, where Jesus says, in the Great Commission, and I will be with you all the days of your life or until the end of the age. I will never leave you nor forsake you. What does Jesus promise the church? His abiding presence. And so we think about him being with us now as being the fulfillment of that. In part it is, but what God promises here is his presence with his people. I will not abandon you. It's not the spiritual presence of God. He's saying that I am going to be with you. You will know that I'm with you because I will not abandon you and my presence will be made known to you. Has that been fulfilled yet? No. And that's where my wife is right. The restoration of Israel in bringing the nation to the land and God coming to be with his people in the land where he never will forsake them and he will never abandon them again. Okay, I can wrap up. There's maybe one other thing that I can mention here. The Gentiles are mentioned in Deuteronomy 32 in prophetic language. Israel's future of demise is prophesied as well as Moses' demise is prophesied, and people struggle over that. Verse 21, they have made me jealous with what is no God. This is Israel. And they have provoked me to anger with their idols. So I will make them jealous with those who are no people. And I will provoke them to anger with a foolish nation. Interesting. What do you think that means? Go to Hosea chapter 1. Verse 9. And Yahweh said, this is the two children of Hosea's wife, get a name. The first will be called Jezreel. Verse 8. When she had weaned no mercy, that is the name of the one, she conceived and bore a son. And Yahweh said, call his name. Where's the Hebrew scholars? What is this in Hebrew? Sorry? Not my people, yeah, but what is the Hebrew term here? Lo ami. Lo ami. Come on, you should know that, Hebrew guys. Lo ami, not my people. Not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. Verse 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be like the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And in the place where it was said to them, you are my people, it shall be said to them, children. Sorry, in the place that it said to them, you are not my people, it shall be said to them, children of the living God. Hang on. So in verse 9 it says, not my people, because God seems to disown them. But then he says later on that they will be called what? Children of the living God. What is happening here? Verse 11, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. What is that? Restoration. This is new covenant language that includes restoration of Israel. They are not my people. And in the place where I said they will not be my people, they will be called the children of the living God. And they shall be gathered together, all the children of Judah and all the children of Israel. That's the restoration. And they shall appoint for themselves one head. Who do you think that is? It's going to be one king that will rule over the nation of Judah and over the people of Judah and Israel. Go over to Romans chapter 9. Look at verse 25. 25. Just read the latter part of verse 24. But also from the Gentiles. Not from the Jews only, but also from the Gentiles. And now he's going to focus on the Gentiles. And indeed, he says in Hosea, those who were not my people, I will call my people. And her who was not beloved, I will call beloved. And in the very place where it was said to them, you are not my people, they will be called children or sons of the living God. He's quoting Hosea. Who does Hosea quote? Deuteronomy. What is Deuteronomy talking about? God will say of his people, you are not my people. Why? Because they worship idols. And how will God make them jealous? By a people who are not a people. That's the Gentiles. So what God does in Romans chapter 9 here is shows that the people, the Gentiles who were being grafted into the vine, which is the promises of Abraham, who are being grafted into the vine, they will be the people that God will use to make Israel jealous. Look at verse 30. That the Gentiles who did not pursue righteousness have attained it, that is a righteousness that is by faith, but that Israel who pursued a law that would lead to righteousness did not succeed in reaching that law. Why? Because they did not pursue it by faith, but if it were based on works, they have stumbled over the stumbling stone, as it is written, behold, I lay in Zion a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense, and whoever believes in him shall not be put to shame. And then he goes on, I'm looking for the verse where he says that God makes them jealous by a Gentile nation. It's in of 19. Yeah. I ask, did Israel not understand? First, Moses says, and this is Deuteronomy, I will make you jealous of those who are not a nation. With a foolish nation, I will make you angry. Speaking about the Gentiles. So God uses the salvation of the Gentiles to make Israel jealous. Why? Why do you think God will do that? Romans 9 deals with it, by the way. So that our salvation as Gentiles would make them desire Christ even more. So that at the end of time, when all the Gentiles have been saved, God will bring forth the Messiah and his people, the church, and Israel will see him for who he is and eventually bow the knee to him as Lord and Savior. Now, I believe it will be the remnant and not all of Israel. I believe the remnant in Israel will be saved and not every single Israelite will be saved. Okay, last part of Deuteronomy, Moses foretells his death. Moses does what the patriarchs also do. They foretell the death. Abraham, Isaac, a lot of these guys knew that they were dying, and they would call in the people and the children and tell them what God promises in prophetic language to give to them. It's no different here. God gives him a little bit more detail of his death than he does with others, but it's still the same thing. So Moses equals himself to the patriarchs in being able to predict Israel's future and also tell of his own death. It's not a problem for God, who prophesies the end from the beginning to tell of somebody's death. Joshua didn't write it, Moses wrote it, and that is the end of the discussion. All right, so I'm going to end there because our time is almost done. But essentially, the book of Deuteronomy is a synopsis of the law, and God wants to remind them of his faithfulness and his promises to them, and that he will not leave them or abandon them, but restore them to a greater reality than they've ever experienced. So part of the promises is not just to be able to have the land, but that they will exceed the nations, and that there will be the place of blessing in the world. Israel does not have that position today, and they will not have it until Christ returns and restores them. Okay, any questions? That was a mouthful. I don't know. The Romans 9 is a difficult one. If you didn't see it, that's okay. Didn't make the connections, that's okay. Romans 9 to 11 is a very challenging section. Nothing? All right, let's close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you for your goodness, and we thank you that you have a future for Israel. It is not, as some theologians suggest, that you've abandoned and divorced your people, that you've replaced them with the church. The Old Testament is absolutely clear that you are devoted to them, and you will continue to be devoted to them. We, the church, are a tool or a means to bring them to jealousy, so that they can see Christ in all his glory and submit and bow the knee to him in salvation. Thank you for the riches that is found in your word, and we pray that as we continue to grow in this study, that you would encourage our hearts, help us to appreciate your word and to have a greater appreciation for the Old Testament. Bless us now as we part. Give thanks to you for your goodness this day, as we pray these things in Christ's name. Amen.